Some men find out their marriage is over in a lawyer's office, sitting across a desk from a stranger who hands them a manila envelope and doesn't make eye contact. Some find out at the kitchen table. Papers already signed, the pen still on the placemat. I found out on the edge of a bathtub in my socks, with the bathroom door closed and the nightlight throwing just enough light to read a phone screen. It was 11:47 on a Thursday night in October. My wife was asleep in the next room, and a number on that screen, a specific, devastating, irrefutable number, ended 31 years in about 4 seconds. I want to be honest with you right from the start. This is not a story about a man who lost his temper. I did not lose my temper. I have never, in 66 years, been a man who loses his temper in a way that serves him. I have watched other men do it. I have watched them yell and slam things and make their anger visible, and I have watched every single one of them lose whatever they were fighting for as a direct result. Anger is a signal. It tells the other person where you are, what you know, and how much it's gotten to you. I decided a long time ago not to send that signal. What I did instead, across 11 days in October, I did quietly, carefully, and in the right order. By the time my wife understood what was happening, it was already done. My name is Donald Marsh. I am 66 years old. I live in Columbus, Ohio, and I have lived here in one house or another for the better part of 4 decades. I spent 33 years as a project manager for a civil engineering firm. Roads, drainage systems, stormwater infrastructure, the kind of work that keeps cities from flooding and that nobody ever thinks about until it stops working. I retired at 64 with a good record, a modest pension, and a retirement account I had been building since I was 33 years old. I drove a 2007 Ford F-150, dark green, and at the time of this story it had about 192,000 miles on it. I kept it because it ran fine, and I had no patience for the idea of spending money to replace something that still did its job. I mowed my own lawn with a push mower I had owned since 2003. I made coffee every morning at 5:45 from a drip machine I had bought at a hardware store for $22. I was not a complicated man, and I had no aspirations toward becoming one. Welcome to Dad's Raw Revenge. Get comfortable, because this one is going to take you somewhere. Drop a comment, and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you're going to love it here. I married Patricia in April of 1993. She was 31. I was 35. We had met at a cookout in the summer of 1991 through a mutual friend named Gary Howell, who worked with her at the hospital and with me on a drainage contract near Westerville. Patricia was standing by a folding table with a paper plate, and she was arguing, pleasantly and with total confidence, with Gary about something I never caught the subject of. I watched her for probably 4 minutes before Gary introduced us. We dated for 14 months, and I proposed in the kitchen of my apartment on a Tuesday evening in October 1992 with no ring yet, just a question. She said yes before I finished the sentence. We had one son, Marcus, born September 3rd, 1995, at 6:14 in the morning at Ohio Health Riverside. I remember the time because I had been awake for 22 hours by then, and I had been watching the clock on the wall, the way you watch a clock, when watching it is the only thing you have any control over. We bought our house on Crescent Mill Drive in 1997 for $141,000. 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, a backyard with a slope to it that made mowing take longer than it should have. We lived in that house for 26 years, the 3 of us and then the 2 of us after Marcus left for college in 2013. And for most of those years, I would have told you it was a good life. Not remarkable. Not what you'd make a movie about, but solid, reliable, and built on something real. Or so I believed. Patricia spent 22 years in hospital administration, then transitioned around 2017 into medical billing consulting, working from home, managing her own clients, setting her own hours. I thought it suited her. She was organized and precise, and she had a mind that worked well with numbers and systems. Early in our marriage, we had divided our financial responsibilities without ever formally discussing it. I handled the maintenance and infrastructure side of things. The house, the cars, the appliances, the contractors. Patricia handled the accounts. She paid the bills, managed the investment accounts, oversaw the retirement fund, I trusted her with it completely and without reservation, the way you trust a person you have lived beside for 30 years. That trust was not stupid. It was not naive. It was a natural result of 3 decades of shared life. It was also, as it turned out, the precise mechanism she used to do what she did. I want to be clear about that. The trust was not the mistake. The trust was reasonable. What was less reasonable, and I have made peace with this, was that I had not looked closely at the accounts in several years. I checked the broad shape of things. I knew, roughly, what we had. I did not scrutinize the details. I had given her signing authority over both the joint investment account and my retirement account in 2014, during a routine estate planning update with an attorney named Frank Wilder, because it was practical and because I had no reason not to. She had that authority for 9 years before she used it the way she used it. The architecture of my problem, as I eventually came to understand it, was this: she had built something over time, carefully, patiently, with a level of structural discipline that, under different circumstances, I might have respected. She had been moving money, in amounts small enough to avoid automatic review flags, on a schedule irregular enough not to form an obvious pattern. From our joint investment account and from my retirement account into a separate individual account I had known nothing about. The account had been opened in April of 2019. The transfers had begun 5 months later, in September that year. By the time Marcus sent me that text in October, she had been doing it for 4 years and 2 months, across 41 separate transactions. The total was $198,400. Marcus called me on a Sunday afternoon in early October, about 3 weeks before the Thursday. He asked how I was doing, asked about the house, asked, and I remember this specifically, whether I had looked at the retirement account lately. I told him I had checked in August, that it was sitting right around $341,000 where it should be. He said, "Okay, good." Then he was quiet for a half-second longer than the conversation required, and he said he'd talk to me soon, and we hung up. I thought about that pause afterward. I filed it somewhere in the back of my mind without opening it. The way you file something you're not ready to examine yet. Marcus works in commercial lending. He has a trained eye for financial documents, for patterns and numbers, for the structural logic of accounts. He had visited us in September, and Patricia had left a folder at his apartment by accident, mixed in with some of his own paperwork, when she helped him sort through a box. He found it 2 days after we left. He sat on it for 3 weeks, telling himself there was an explanation, working through every alternative he could construct, looking for any version of the story in which what he was reading made innocent sense. He found none. On the Thursday night in question, he had made a decision. When my phone vibrated on the nightstand at 11:47 p.m., his text read, "Dad, check your retirement account right now. Then pretend you're having chest pains and don't tell her I called." I read it twice. I am a slow reader under pressure. I read everything twice when something is at stake. I got out of bed the way a man gets out of bed when he is trying not to disturb the mattress. Slowly, weight distributed, one deliberate movement at a time. Patricia didn't move. I went to the bathroom in my socks, pulled the door almost closed without letting the latch click, and sat down on the edge of the tub. I turned on the night light above the sink rather than the overhead, because the overhead light comes on with a sound Patricia had commented on before. I opened the retirement account app. $14,200. I sat with that number for what I later estimated was about 4 minutes. I know it was 4 minutes because I looked at the clock when I first sat down, 11:52, and again when I stood up, 11:56. In those 4 minutes, I did not feel rage. I did not feel grief. Exactly. Though grief came later and smaller, quieter doses over following days. What I felt was something in me go very still. Cold. Absolute. The particular stillness of a man who has just received the last piece of information. He needed to understand a picture that had been in front of him, partly assembled, for longer than he realized. The picture was complete now. I didn't like it, but I could see every edge of it clearly, and clarity, even when it hurts, is something I have always found more useful than confusion. I turned off the nightlight. I walked back to the bedroom. I laid down in my spot on the left side of the bed. Patricia was breathing steadily. I looked at the ceiling for 2 hours and 14 minutes. At 2:09 a.m., I sent Marcus 3 words. I see it. He replied in 11 seconds. Call me tomorrow. Not from the house. The next morning was a Friday. I woke at 5:45, which is when I always wake. I made coffee, which is what I always do. Patricia came down at 7:10. I handed her a cup. She said, "Thank you." I said, "Good morning." She said, "Good morning." I looked at her the way I had looked at her 10,000 mornings. She looked back at me the way she always did. There was nothing in her face that I could read. She was a composed woman. She had always been a composed woman. I had always considered that one of her qualities. I told her I had some errands to run and might be out most of the morning. She said that was fine. She sat down at the kitchen table with her coffee and her phone, and I drove the F-150 to a gas station 2 miles away and filled the tank, even though it was 3/4 full, and then I sat in the parking lot and called Marcus. He talked for 26 minutes. I did not interrupt him once. He told me about the folder. He told me about the 3 weeks he had spent trying to find an alternative explanation. He told me what the account statements showed. Not the full picture. He didn't have that yet, but enough of the shape of it to know the direction. He apologized 4 times. I told him each time that he had done the right thing and that he had nothing to apologize for. By the end of the call, he had steadied out. I told him I was going to handle it. He asked me if I needed him to do anything. I told him not yet. I told him to sit tight and not say anything to anyone, including his wife, for the time being. He said he understood. I hung up. I sat in the parking lot for another 6 minutes. Then I drove across town to the office of Raymond Cho. Raymond Cho had practiced family law for 27 years. His office was on the 2nd floor of a brick building on Reed Road, above a tax preparation service, and across the hall from a physical therapy practice. His name was on a brass plate by the stairwell door. His waiting room had 4 chairs, a coffee maker, and a framed photograph of a covered bridge somewhere in rural Ohio. His assistant's name was Carol, and she offered me coffee when I arrived and did not make small talk, which I appreciated. I told her I did not have an appointment, but that I needed to speak with Mr. Cho about a financial matter related to a potential dissolution. She went to check. I came back out in 3 minutes and told me he had 45 minutes. I sat across from Raymond Cho at 10:14 that Friday morning, and I put Marcus's copies of the account statements on his desk, and I told him what I knew, which was still partial at that point, and I told him what I suspected, which was more complete. He read every page of the statements without comment. He asked me 3 questions. He made 7 notations on a yellow legal pad in small, deliberate handwriting I couldn't read from my side of the desk. Then he set the pen down and folded his hands and looked at me with a specific expression of a man who is about to tell you something you already know but need to hear said aloud by a professional. He said the account appeared to have been opened in April of 2019. He said the transfers, based on what he was looking at, appear to range from approximately $2,300 on the low end to $22,700 on the high end. He said the amounts and intervals were consistent with a structured approach designed to stay beneath reporting thresholds. He used the word deliberate. He used the word systematic. He said the word textbook once, in a tone that was neither accusatory nor sympathetic. The tone of a man describing a mechanism, not a moral judgment. I asked him what I needed to do. He gave me a list. It was written in pencil on a piece of yellow legal pad paper, and it had 7 items on it, and it was not a short list. The first item was a forensic accountant. The second was a full account audit going back to 2019. The third through 7th I will not detail here, because they were legal procedural steps and the specifics would only matter to an attorney. What mattered to me was that the list existed, that it was orderly, and that each item had a clear sequence. I understood sequence. I had spent 33 years managing projects that ran on sequence. You do not pour the concrete before the rebar is in. You do not file the paperwork before the documentation is complete. You do not move to step 4 until steps 1 through 3 are finished and verified. I looked at Raymond Cho's list, and I understood it as a project. I knew how to run a project. I thanked him. Carol scheduled a follow-up for the following Monday. I drove home and made a pot of coffee I didn't need and sat at the kitchen table with the lights off for a long time. I want to tell you about the 11 days because the 11 days are the actual story. The ending is what it is. I will tell you the ending. But the 11 days, the particular texture of them, the discipline they required, the specific way to sitting at dinner across from a woman I had known for 31 years, while knowing what I knew, that is the part one thing about. That Friday evening, I made dinner. Pasta, the way Marcus likes it, with the simple red sauce I had been making for 20 years. Patricia came in at 6 and said it smelled good. I said, thank you. We ate. We talked about a neighbor's fence, about whether the furnace needed its annual service, about a phone call Patricia had taken from her sister in Cincinnati. I listened to everything she said, and I responded to all of it with the same measured attention I had given her conversations for 30 years. I went to bed at my normal time. I slept 3 hours. On Saturday morning at 8:15, I drove to a branch of a different bank. Not our bank, a different institution on the east side, and opened an individual checking account in my name only. I deposited nothing into it. I simply opened it. The young man who assisted me was named Trevor, and he had an efficient, pleasant manner and asked no questions about why I was there on a Saturday morning doing something so quiet and specific. I appreciated that about him. On Monday, I met Raymond Cho again. He had spent the weekend making calls. He had arranged, on my behalf, a consultation with a forensic accountant named Sandra Okafor, who worked out an office in Worthington and whose background was in bank auditing and financial misconduct documentation. She was 47 years old, precise in the specific way that people who have spent careers reading financial records are precise, not cold but exact, the way a good level is exact. She did not speculate. She identified. She told me at the outset of our 90-minute meeting that she would need full account access across all joint and individual accounts from January 2018 forward, and that she would have a preliminary accounting within 6 business days. She spread what she already had across the conference table in an organized row, 14 months of statements ordered chronologically, with anomalies flagged in pencil at the margin. She walked me through each flagged item. I asked 4 questions over the course of the meeting. She answered each one without elaboration or softening. I appreciated that. I have never found comfort in softening. The truth is the truth whether it is delivered gently or plainly, and plain delivery saves time. I sat across from her and kept my hands flat on the conference table and listened to each item in sequence. When she finished, I thanked her. I drove home. I made dinner. Patricia was on a call when I arrived, her office door mostly closed, her voice carrying professional register she used with clients, organized, assured, solutions-oriented. I stood in the hallway for a moment and listened to her, and then went to the kitchen and started cooking. If you have been listening for a while, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing, and it means everything to us. Hit the like button while you're at it, and drop your thoughts in the comments. On Tuesday, I called our auto insurance carrier and requested that my vehicle, the 2007 F-150, be moved to its own separate policy in my name. I gave a reason when asked, which was that I was simplifying administrative management of our policies. That was accurate enough. On Wednesday morning, I drove to my former employer's main office on Front Street and met with a benefits administrator named Gerald Parks to review the beneficiary designation on my pension. I had last updated the designation in 2014. I updated it again that Wednesday, October 16th, at 9:47 in the morning, in a small conference room on the 3rd floor with a view of the parking structure. Gerald Parks was a quiet man with reading glasses on a cord around his neck and a practiced efficiency with paperwork. He walked me through each document, pointed where I needed to sign, and said nothing personal. I signed everything and thanked him and left. Thursday was quiet. Patricia and I had dinner. I asked about her sister. She asked about mine. We watched an hour of television. I went to bed before she did. I lay in the dark. I thought about 31 years as a structural object, the weight of it, the load-bearing elements of it, the places where it had held, and the places where, apparently, it had not. I am an engineer by training and by temperament, and I find that when I am trying to process something I cannot fully absorb emotionally, I examine it structurally instead. What holds? What has failed? What was load-bearing and what was decorative? The load-bearing elements of our marriage, it turned out, had been almost entirely on one side. On Friday of that week, 9 days after the Thursday night in the bathroom, Sandra Okafor's preliminary report arrived at Raymond Cho's office. He called me at 3:17 in the afternoon, while I was in the driveway of our house changing a headlight on the F-150. I had known the headlight needed changing for 2 weeks, and I had finally gotten around to it that afternoon, because the specific ordinariness of changing a headlight on a familiar truck was something I needed that day more than I could articulate. I set down the socket wrench and answered the call. The total, Raymond said, was $198,400. 41 transfers over a period of 50 months. The earliest was dated September 14th, 2019, in the amount of $4,700. The most recent was August 3rd that year, 11 weeks before the Thursday text, in the amount of $6,200. The receiving account was an individual savings account in Patricia's name only, opened at a credit union in Worthington in April of 2019, 5 months before the first transfer. The account had, as of Sandra's last data point, a balance of approximately $204,000, the difference between $198,400 and the current balance attributable to interest accumulation over 4 years. I listened to all of it without speaking. When Raymond finished, he asked me if I had any questions. I said I needed one more day before he filed. He said that was fine. He told me to call him by end of business Friday of the following week at the latest. I went back to the headlight. I finished the installation. I tested it. It worked. I put the tools away in the garage, in their places, the way I had always put them away. Then I went inside and washed my hands at the kitchen sink. I want to explain the one more day, because people have asked me about it, and I think the answer matters. That Saturday morning, I woke at 5:45. I made coffee. It was a cool morning, overcast, the kind of flat gray October sky that Columbus does well. Patricia came downstairs at 7:20 in her robe and poured herself a cup from the pot I had already made. She sat across from me at the kitchen table. We talked about nothing that mattered. The weather, whether to replace the dining room light fixture before winter, a podcast she had been listening to. She was warm, pleasant. She had been warm and pleasant every one of those 10 days. I had been watching, carefully and without appearing to watch, for some thread of guilt or awareness or apprehension in the way she held her cup or answered a question or looked up from her phone when I came into the room. I had found nothing. She was a composed woman. She had always been a composed woman. That composure, which I had spent 31 years reading as steadiness and reliability, I was now reading as something else entirely. It had not changed. My interpretation of it had. I sat across from her, and I thought about the cookout in 1991. I thought about the Tuesday evening in October of 1992 with no ring yet. I thought about 6:14 on the morning of September 3rd, 1995. I thought about $141,000 and Crescent Mill Drive in 26 years, and the push mower I had owned since 2003 and 192,000 miles on a dark green truck. I thought about 41 transfers in September 14th, 2019, and $198,400, and a credit union in Worthington 5 miles from our house, where she had opened an account in April that year and had not mentioned it once in the 4.5 years since. I thought about Marcus on the phone for 26 minutes telling me he was sorry. I thought about all of it in the same way I would think about a project I was closing out, systematically, completely, without leaving any item unexamined. I let myself feel the full weight of it for a specific period of time. I did not cut it short, and I did not extend it. Then I put my cup in the sink, told Patricia I was meeting a friend for coffee, and drove to a coffee shop on High Street, where I had arranged to meet Raymond Cho at 9:30. We sat in a corner booth for 91 minutes. I reviewed Sandra Okafor's full preliminary report, which Raymond had printed and organized in a manila folder with numbered tabs. I asked 12 questions. Raymond answered each one. I signed the authorization for filing. Raymond filed the dissolution petition that afternoon at 4:38 p.m., along with Sandra Okafor's documentation and a motion for immediate financial protective order on all joint accounts. The protective order was granted the following Tuesday at 2:15 p.m. by a judge named the Honorable Christine Walters, whose clerk Raymond had dealt with on prior matters and who, Raymond noted, ran a tight courtroom, and had no patience for delay. On the Wednesday following, October 23rd, at 9:07 in the morning, Patricia was served at our home on Crescent Mill Drive by a process server named Daniel Ferris, a compact man in a gray jacket who had been to our neighborhood twice before on unrelated matters and who, according to Raymond, was reliable and unremarkable in his manner, which was exactly what the situation required. I was at Marcus's apartment when it happened. Raymond had advised me not to be in the house. I had taken that advice, drove to Marcus's place at 8:15, and sat at his kitchen table drinking coffee that was better than mine and talking about nothing much while we both waited. She called me at 9:14. I watched the phone ring. I sent it to voicemail. Marcus watched me do this and did not say anything. I went to the window and looked out at his street. He handed me a cup and said, "You okay?" I said yes. He said, "I know." I said, "I know you know." I listened to the voicemail later. Sitting in the F-150 in Marcus's parking lot, Patricia's voice was measured, controlled. She said she thought there had been a misunderstanding and that we should talk. She used that word, misunderstanding, with a specific careful emphasis that told me she was testing the word as a strategy, gauging whether it might work, the way an engineer tests a material before committing to it as structural. It would not work. She likely knew that already. But she had to try it, because it was the first move available to her, and she was a woman who thought in moves. I called Raymond instead. He told me that Philip Garrett, Patricia's attorney, an established family law practitioner in Upper Arlington whom Raymond described without elaboration as someone who would advise settlement once he had reviewed the documentation, had already been in contact that morning. Philip Garrett's review took 4 business days. On October 27th, his office contacted Raymond's office and indicated that his client wished to explore resolution. I was not surprised. Sandra Okafor's documentation was, as Raymond had said when he first received the full report, comprehensive. That word had covered it. The settlement was reached on November 9th, at 2:30 in the afternoon, in a conference room at Raymond Cho's office. Patricia was present with Philip Garrett. I was present with Raymond. It was the first time. I had been in the same room with her since the morning I had left for Marcus's apartment. She was composed. I was composed. We did not speak to each other directly. Philip Garrett and Raymond conducted the discussion, which lasted 47 minutes. The terms included full restitution of the $198,400, structured as a primary lien against Patricia's portion of the marital home equity at time of sale, a secondary lien against her individual retirement assets, and a monthly payment schedule on any remaining balance following the asset distributions. The timeline was negotiated. The amount were confirmed. Sandra Okafor's documentation had framed the available options in a way that left Philip Garrett limited space to work in, and he was a professional who understood the geography of limited space. When it was finished, I thanked Raymond and shook his hand. He said I had handled it well. I told him I'd had a good attorney. He said that was true, and that it had also helped that I had not deviated from the sequence and had not done anything emotional or impulsive in the 11 days between the Thursday night and the filing. I thought about that on the drive home. I drove home the long way, through the neighborhoods along Henderson Road, and past a hardware store on Livingston, and past a school where Marcus had gone to 4th and 5th grade before we moved to Crescent Mill Drive. The leaves were down. The gutters on Henderson Road were full of them. The sky was the same flat gray it had been on the Saturday morning 2 weeks earlier, when I had sat at the kitchen table with Patricia and let myself feel the full weight of the thing, and then put my cup in the sink. I parked in the driveway. I went inside. The house was quiet. I went to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee and sat at the table. I did not turn on the television. I did not call anyone. I sat there until the light outside the kitchen window changed from gray afternoon to gray early evening. And then I got up and made dinner, because it was dinner time, and I was a man who made dinner at dinner time. Marcus called at 6:30. He asked me how I was. I told him I was all right, which was not entirely true and was not entirely false, but was accurate in the way that matters most. I was functional, I was clear, and I was pointed in the right direction. He said he was coming for dinner on Sunday. I said I would make the pasta. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That was 15 months ago. The house sold the following February. I live now in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Columbus, 3 miles from Marcus, 7 minutes from a hardware store I have been going to for 22 years. I have a small porch that faces east and gets good morning light when the sky cooperates. I drink my coffee out there when the weather allows. The 2007 F-150 has 204,000 miles on it now and still runs without complaint, which I continue to find satisfying in a quiet, uncomplicated way. The retirement account is rebuilt from the settlement proceeds and sits currently at $211,300. It will not be $341,000 again. It will be what it is. I have rebuilt things from a lower starting point than $211,300, and I have no anxiety about the arithmetic. What I have instead is time and a clear set of accounts and a kitchen table that is entirely my own. I have thought often, over these 15 months, about the structure of patience, what it costs to maintain over time, what it builds, what it cannot, in the end, protect you from. I do not have a clean answer to those questions, and I am not sure I want one. What I have is this. When the moment came, I did not yell. I did not break anything. I did not make a speech at a conference table or send a message I would have needed to walk back later. I sat on the edge of a bathtub and looked at a number and let the stillness settle over me, cold and final, and then I went back to bed. And in the morning, I made coffee and drove a truck that needed its tank filled even though it didn't, and called my son from a gas station parking lot and started to work. Some men mistake quiet for absence. They look at a man who doesn't raise his voice, and they conclude there is nothing behind the eyes. That is a mistake. It is usually the last one they make about that particular man. The retirement account is at $211,300. The truck has 204,000 miles on it. The gutters on the east side don't need cleaning until spring. I know what needs doing and in what order. That is enough. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of Dad's Raw Revenge. I will see you on the next one.